Modi acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of this land. Welcome to the Modi Playbook. If you've ever felt like your systems are technically in place, but somehow still feel chaotic behind the scenes, you're in the right spot. This is where we share what we're seeing, what's working, what's not, and the lessons businesses learn the hard way. Think of it as practical strategy straight from the trenches. Let's dive in.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Moti Playbook. One shift, one system, one measurable improvement. My name's Kyle Rogers. I'm one of the solutions architects over here at Moti, helping businesses to get better processes in place from their sales, their initial inquiries, and helping them to pass that through to their services and their operations teams. Today, we're talking to someone who has done a lot of work in construction and trades and services businesses, goes inside those businesses every day and sees exactly where things are working and where they're not working. Now, typically, construction and trades and services businesses are winning more and more work, but the business can sometimes feel harder, not easier. And today, we're going to talk about the why. So to help me discuss this, I'm going to introduce and pass over to my colleague, Kate, who's going to introduce herself and give us a little bit more insight into her background throughout construction, trades and services businesses.
Thanks, Kyle. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me on. So as Kyle mentioned, I'm Kate. I'm a colleague of Kyle's here at Moti. So I am a business consultant. I've been working with organisations in trades and construction for the last 7 years. So it's been a wonderful time for me, or actually nearly 8 years. It's been a wonderful time. I really enjoy what I do. And I support leaders with workflow challenges. So I help businesses to look for better business outcomes, to find gaps in their process, to find maybe cracks in their workflow so that we can find a solution to help them perform and to help their projects succeed. I think one of the things that I keep seeing, when I go into these organizations and these businesses is that quite often they're growing. They might have started really small and they want to grow and scale upwards, maybe from having 2 or 3 technicians up to 10 or 15, but it feels like they're going backwards. So there's more work coming in, they've got more contracts, maybe they've picked up some new customers, but instead of things being really smooth, with the experts that they already have in place in those teams, it gets messier and it gets harder. So the common challenges that I see with rework, with double handling, with jobs not running smoothly, even though we have the experts in place, and the people that know how to do those jobs really well. I don't think the issue itself is the work. It's what happens between winning that work and then the work actually being delivered out to a customer or to a project. So again, those teams know what they're doing, but internally things are a little bit disconnected. So we're being reactive to that growth and we're picking up more work, but we haven't necessarily scaled our operations and our processes to support that work. Yeah.
So Kate, help me to, paint a picture. So you've obviously had this 8 years of working with a number of construction and trades and services businesses. What does it look like when they hit that stall point where it feels like things, they feel like they're growing, but they're just not quite sure if they're growing or whether they're adding staff unnecessarily or whatever that might be? What does that look like to you as an outsider looking in and dealing with these businesses?
Yeah, sure. Where we're looking at growth in a business, and it might have started off as a one-man band, I suppose, or a couple who, are doing the work during the day and perhaps doing the books at night time. They're picking up more work, they're picking up new contracts perhaps, they're stretching into a slightly different arm of their work. Maybe they've gone from being a plumber to a maintenance plumber who's, picking up some reactive contracts. What's happening is that things are starting to fall through the cracks as that work gets bigger. So maybe it used to be that somebody had a text message telling them in the morning what job to go out to, and all of a sudden when there's 50 jobs to go out to through the day, text messages aren't necessarily enough anymore. So, there are things that are falling through the cracks as the work grows, the processes have to grow with it. So what we then see is that the business starts to struggle. We've got these experts in place, as I said, who know how to do this work really well, but all of a sudden the work is not flowing well. It's a little bit disjointed, maybe an email that gets lost in the wash, maybe a quote that doesn't get followed up and, it expires or something like that. So we're finding that the job does not translate from one part of its life cycle to the next part of its life cycle. And when that happens, you've got to spend all of this time, chasing these things up or looking for these problems to try and find out what went wrong. So where you've then got people who would ordinarily be out on the tools or doing the work or doing the job that they do really well, they're spending all of this time doing rework, following up things, looking for lost information, trying to patch that back together. And that then means you're losing all of that time, and your margin starts shrinking because you're spending more time chasing these jobs up than you are actually out on the tools doing them. So even if you get more people in place in your organization to try and manage some of those gaps, if those processes aren't in place too, it doesn't tend to help very well, because it's not necessarily about having another person in place to do that follow-up. It's about making sure there's a process for that follow-up to happen.
Yep. Look, I think there's some good points that you've made there. And I think even if I think back to those conversations I've had in recent weeks or recent months, like I've heard of businesses with 20-odd technicians where all the leads are still coming into the two directors who then take a screenshot and send that through in a text message or in WhatsApp to people in the admin team to go and follow up with. I've had as an example, we had some emergency plumbing. We had a drain blocked at home a couple of weeks ago, reached out, got an emergency plumber to come in, unblock the drain. Awesome. Told us that we needed to basically have our plumbing redone and remove a whole bunch of piping.
No.
I said to him, yep, cool, no worries. Send us through the quote. Like, we'll discuss it and figure out what we're going to do about that. They sent through that quote 3 weeks ago. I've still got the text message saved because I wanted to see whether they would send up any follow-ups or anything off the back of it. I haven't heard anything since. So just sent out that quote for
nothing.
For $5,000 worth of work. Haven't heard a single thing since. So I could have gone with another competitor, might have gone and shopped around that quote. Or I might not have had time to do it because I'm busy and, wife and kids, all that sort of stuff. And might have just easily ticked off on the quote, but I haven't sent any follow-up to remind me of it. So obviously what we do, I've flagged that because I wanted to see what their sales and their follow-up process is, but it's something that's so easy for them where they could just automate some of those sales follow-ups. Instead, they're probably relying on, at least from what I've gathered through other conversations, relying on adding more admin staff to go ahead and do those follow-ups, like you've said, right? Everyone's chasing their tail trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's just where I see a lot of businesses get stuck because they've got a process in place. They're not sure, or they don't necessarily want to go and spend to have another one. But for them, that's, they might just automate sending follow-ups as an example. For every 10 follow-ups they send, they might get another 2 more jobs out of that without them having to really do anything. That's another $10,000 worth of work into the business that's paying more bills, paying more payroll, helping them to add more staff, hire another plumber, etc.
Well, that's it, right? You think about those sorts of jobs would cover somebody's wage if you've got another admin staff member. So, it might be one job here or one job there that is forgotten to be followed up, but it all adds up over the course of time, right? So you think about, if you had 1 or 2 missed opportunities every week, what does that look like in 12 months' time? How much revenue is not flowing into your business because there's not a process for a quick email to go out to say, hey, we just want to follow up and see if you're really interested in this work with us. Yeah.
I guess one of the things that uncouple with a lot of those businesses is, as you said, right, they've already got a set of tools that they've got in place, and there's that fear around, do we want to spend more money on another tool? Do we need to add another tool? Can we already do this in what we're using to manage our compliance, our technicians, our contracts, our work orders, etc.?
Yep.
So I guess as far as getting into the detail, knowing there's different tools that do one thing, what have you seen as far as, okay, here's a tool that does one thing, we're trying to get it to do a whole bunch of things. Does it lead to broken handoffs? And for you, who's dealt with all these businesses, where does it actually break?
That's a really common conversation point that comes up in a lot of businesses that I speak to, is this thought process that we have one tool in place or 2 tools in place. We might have Xero for our accounting and for our payroll, and we've got, spreadsheets for our reports, and we've got another platform, which might be something like a HubSpot or a Pipedrive. And then this conversation comes up where I say, well, do you have a job management system in place to manage your calendar tracking, your scheduling, your labor, your technicians? And I hear, no, we don't. We don't want another platform in our tech stack. It's just another subscription, another cost. And we don't understand the benefit of what that's going to bring to our organization. So I think that a couple of common misunderstandings. And one is that I don't need another platform in my tech stack because I should have something that does everything already. And the second one is, if I get another platform, is it going to replace the platform that I've already got? And I've invested time into setting up and time into training my staff how to use and money into this subscription that I've already got. When I'm having these conversations with people, I often address that are tools that are put together very specifically to do very specific things for your organization. And an example I would say is that, you have Xero in place to manage your payroll and perhaps to manage your timesheet tracking and things like that. But you wouldn't use Xero necessarily to look at your calendar resourcing for sending a tech out to a job. It's not designed for that. So when we're having this conversation, we talk about the different tools that are put in place to manage different things. So if we were going to look at getting a job management system, it doesn't necessarily replace your Xero platform because it doesn't perform the functions that platform does. And same with looking at a sales CRM, getting a sales CRM to manage your clients, your relationships, nurturing those relationships, looking to get that repeat work, or to nurture those customers who do already give you repeat work and contracts. Those systems don't replace the job management system, which is really there to manage that work that you physically need to go out and do on the ground. So realistically, for each business, to have a think about what platform you use to manage your customer relationships and to manage your incoming leads, what platform you use to manage your jobs, so your scheduling, as I said, your technicians, all those sorts of things, and then what platform you use to manage your financial side of the business, so whether it's an MYOB or a Xero or something like that. Now, these platforms do separate things, but it doesn't mean they operate in a vacuum. We can connect those together so that they can share as much information as they can to help you hand over a job from one part of its life cycle to the next part. So to hand it from being an incoming lead or being a new job in your business to then actioning that job and doing the work that's required to then taking payment for that job and seeing what your profit margins look like. So here, I think that the real cost that we see in a business of not having these platforms in place to do this work is that you're then trying to patch those gaps and you're spending a lot of time trying to connect those dots where a platform might be able to do that for you. So people are spending more time, manually putting together the information that they need or manually connecting the dots or copying and pasting things over. And that really stalls the momentum of both jobs and your profit margins. So the cost here is not about inefficiency with these platforms. We're stalling momentum because the platforms are not really talking to each other.
And I guess on that, right, I jump on Seek a lot for the sake of trying to find new potential companies to prospect into, right? I think it's a great avenue. You can see who's hiring, who's growing their teams, who's growing their businesses, right? And if I filter it by construction or trades and services, I always see admin staff, I always see schedulers being added, and I often sit there and wonder, are they really at a point where they need to add in an additional team member for that? And then you look at the job descriptions for them, right? And their scheduling, their administration, their following up on sales and quotes and inquiries. Like I often sit there and go, gee, that must be a real tough gig because you're trying to manage between, as you've talked about, right, a few siloed systems, trying to get data from one place into another place, dealing with different people in different departments, trying to do a multitude of, wear a few different hats, right? Like a lot of people in small businesses do. But at the same time, are you just adding more staff and adding more cost to the business and eating into those profit margins you're talking about, right? This is where you start to see those dollar figures that, starting to become part of that problem. And I guess, for you who's, dealt with a lot of these businesses, what's that cost really going to be to the business as far as that broken handoff?
Yeah, it springs to mind instantly an example of a business that I visited some time back where they were looking at growth and they were looking at connecting platforms and wanted to talk about how to get the best out of the platforms that they had. So they'd asked me to come in to do a review with them of what was in place and what we could fix up and what we could change. So when I went into that business on the first day, I made a point of walking around and talking to each department to understand who worked there, what they did, what their role was, what processes they followed, so I could have a look to see how all of these things connected together. And in the admin team, they had a team member who spent all day, every day. She was hired to create new jobs in their job management system. And she would dial into different customer portals. So you're thinking, some of the bigger clients, you think in the airports perhaps, or the big cleaning companies, they've got portals that they require contractors to dial into to pick up jobs or pick up work that's been dished out. So every day she would dial into, 6 or 7 different portals, and she would copy and paste these jobs into the job management platform to then create the work in their system. And that's all she did for 8 hours every day. So, when I was talking to her, she was pretty dissatisfied with her role. She was pretty dissatisfied that she had no room for growth. There was no variation to what she did. She was just literally copying and pasting information, each day in and day out. So when we went through in a little bit more detail and discovered that we could export some of this work and import it into their job management platform, we were looking at cutting out, 5 hours worth of work for her each day, which was huge. So that business was paying a wage and an overhead for somebody to do a role that we could have looked at connecting the dots together and connecting the two platforms together, even just a little bit, to really cut down on that manual work and that manual entry, which then meant she was freed up to go and do other work that the business wasn't able to service at that time. So she was looking at some internal documentation and process documentation that they'd never even started. So, when we're looking at what does that look like in practice, this business was paying a salary for someone to do a task that could have been automated in the background had they looked at connecting those two systems together. And that's huge. So I think the loss in profit there for that business, not even the loss in profit, but having a person dedicated to that role where they could be doing something much more meaningful shows that even just spending a day going through what you've got in place or the processes that you have and looking at how you can tighten those is really, really valuable. So when you're looking at that broken handoff, that's the true cost. That's the true cost that can be racked up.
Yeah, and I think just on that, I think that's where I really see some difference in terms of business mindset there. So some people sit there and go, look, it's just a case I can just cut the costs and get rid of staff, increase my margins, I guess, and increase my profits. Whereas other businesses I've seen, the ones that really do a good job of looking to try and scale, as you said, right, they help to automate those processes, get those systems talking to each other, refine their systems and their processes in place. So then those people they already have that know the business and know how the business operates can now spend more time working with current customers, engaging their current customers, or maybe reaching back out to people that they might have done some work with or have some contract with that might have expired and start to reinvestigate, hey, we used to do some work with you 12 months ago, 2 years ago. Seems like we haven't spoken in a while. Is there a chance for us to re-engage and have more of those conversations, right? Help to, the hardest thing is trying to find a new customer. You've already worked with these people. They know you do some good things. You've already got people on staff that know what you're doing, but you're now not getting them to do that simple data entry that you've talked about. Now we can get them to actually speak to and work with customers. And as you talked about, right, that job fulfillment, that job enjoyment, people don't necessarily love that data entry. They might do it for 6 to 12 months. Then they go, I'm bored of this. I'm going to go do something else or go and change role or move somewhere into a different company. Then you're going to go through and do that rehiring process all over again, spend tens of thousands of dollars hiring, training, getting someone back into seat as opposed to going, hey, I need you to go and speak to these 50 customers we've done X amount of work with. That's going to help us to go from here up to here as far as that next growth phase within the business. So I think we've painted a pretty clear picture, I think, of what broken looks like or what the bad looks like. When businesses you've worked with, construction trades and services, get this right, what have you noticed and what does that actually look like?
When businesses spend a bit of time to focus on the handover and what we can do to connect systems together, it makes a huge change. We look at jobs that are coming into the business in a seamless way, in the same way each time. We can automate that process so that we're always picking up that same level of information. The dots are being filled together. So if we're looking at something like Pipedrive, the deals can be automatically created. We can put in as much information as we want, when we're either importing those deals or we're pulling them through from a website or something like that. And that data just flows through seamlessly to the sales team. So, there's less rework, there's less phone calls, manual entry, etc. All of that information is at their fingertips straight away. That then frees up time for those businesses to start connecting the dots to other departments. How do we get the information from, let's say, the sales team across to our operational team when we win that deal? So, we're looking at closing that gap between broken handoff and allowing people more time to talk to each other and more time to follow up the things that really matter or to follow up the issues that can't be fixed by automation when, maybe we don't have parts in stock and we need to go chase down a different supplier. We've freed up somebody the time to go and do that. So I think when we're using, these platforms and putting them into place, like the Pipedrives or the HubSpots, Simpro to manage your jobs or ServiceMate or Aeroflow, things like that, as these platforms integrate with each other, we're freeing up people's time to do more meaningful work in the business and to focus on the business growth itself rather than patching the gaps in operations. So operations team have the information that they need before the job starts. The sales team have the information they need before the deal even takes off. The marketing team have got the customer information stored safely and correctly. All of these systems are talking to each other. So we start to get visibility across the whole business instead of seeing these jobs in silos and only getting bits of information at each given point of the life cycle. So the other thing that enables is the ability for us to connect the dots on the data and draw that out in a much more meaningful way. So we can start to pull out business information that's synced across different areas of the business, or piece together much better visibility into a complete job and what the margins look like, what the time it takes to do that job looks like, what the true cost of, having people to run that job or to organise that job look like. And a business can then make much better decisions about how they want to grow and how they want to move forward.
And as far as, I guess people have this preconception that there's a huge technical setup involved of, I've got to got to move the earth, heaven and earth to make things happen. Is that the case, or is it more straightforward than people might think?
I think it's a lot more straightforward than people might think. It just takes a bit of time and investment of understanding your own processes and understanding what happens in your business to be able to see where the gaps are and how to patch them. So a lot of these platforms do have natively built integrations. If we're looking at something like Aeroflow, it's got a native integration to things like GroundPlan. It's got a native integration to Xero. If we're looking at Simpro, there's lots of other native integrations there too. So, connecting those dots at that level is fantastic, but often those integrations are limited in the capability of what data they can send across and receive back into them. So that's where, you and I know, Kyle, that we spend a bit of time then talking about, what extra bits of information do we want to see? How do we want to connect those platforms together? And you can engage somebody like us to then fill that gap and build that integration link for you. So is it a big technical lift up? Not really. Do you have to have a dedicated developer on staff with you? No, you don't. There are organizations out there like us who will do that work for you. And I think once that information is in place and you've gone through and discovered, what you need to see, it reduces, that time that you're spending trying to collect that data and trying to update, those manual spreadsheets or to update those old report boards that you've had for years and years and years, and you're familiar with them. But it takes somebody hours each week to go and get the information to put into there. So it does depend on the complexity of your business. If you've got a really big business with maybe 8 different departments, obviously there's going to be quite a bit of work on, having a look at how we connect them together in a meaningful way if they don't all follow that same workflow process. And that's the hardest part of this exercise, is to have a look at the process that needs to be designed and to get that in place for your teams. So I would always say that, to start that conversation, that you need to sit down and talk to your teams, talk about what works well and what doesn't and what gaps that you have.
Yeah, cool. And I guess as far as looking back across your career, could you maybe walk us through what that looks like for maybe a business or a couple of businesses that you've worked with in the past? It might be, I guess, shared story across a couple of different customers. Obviously, no need to name names, but how have you seen this play out for customers in real life?
Over the course of time, I've worked with lots of different businesses and of different sizes. So, if I'm thinking back to that company that I, spent a few days with, where they had a dedicated admin person just entering jobs, they were almost 1,000 strong in their workforce. So it was a big company. They had multi-million-dollar contracts. They had lots of recurring work, 8 different divisions. It was huge. And I think we spent 3 days sitting down and talking about their processes. And at the end of the 3 days, we had a whiteboard full of about 500 or 600 sticky notes of all of the things that we either wanted to change, implement, or update. And when we boiled it down after the 3 days were finished and we'd done all of that brainstorming, we actually worked out that it really came down to about 10 key sticky notes. Everybody across their business had the same ideas and the same things that they wanted to fix and streamline. But because they hadn't talked to each other before, everybody had different inputs, and everybody wanted to have their say about what they thought was broken or what we could do better. But it was all actually the same ideas. So when we boiled it right back down, the work that we needed to do was actually quite straightforward. And I think about walking into little businesses too, where it might be just 1 or 2 people who are working out of a small factory or sometimes working out of, their home shed. And often the outcomes that we're looking for are exactly the same as these big businesses. We just want to see a process in place that gives consistent results and it gives better data and better visibility into a business, because we know that all of that saves time and it saves money ultimately.
So I guess we're almost out of time for today. So if we're starting to I guess, think about the shift, right? If a construction or a trades and services business owner is listening right now, I guess they're resonating with a lot of what we've talked about, or thinking about their own business and I guess some of the similarities we've discussed as far as challenges or things they might like to improve. What would you say would be the one shift that they should make or that they really need to consider making in their business?
The first thing I would always recommend to any business who is thinking about either growth or who's thinking about what works well and what doesn't is that you need to communicate with your team. You've got to break down the silos and talk to each person within your organization who has a role and who is, the owner of that role, because they are going to give you some really valuable information about what works well now and what doesn't work well now. And then you can start to use that to connect the dots about, what systems do I have that aren't talking well, or how do I patch those gaps? So I have 3 key questions that I always ask any customer that I speak to, if we're starting to discover gaps or starting to look at process. And they are, what do you like about your current process? What works really well for you? What do you find challenging or you don't like, or you find it's just something you don't want to do, or it's a bit annoying for you? And lastly, if you had a magic wand that you could wave and do anything to fix up your process or to fix up your workday, what would it be? No holds barred. And think big. Think about, I'd like a coffee machine that spits out 7 coffees an hour for me, or a system that magically just spits out the reports that I want without me having to build them. But you tell me, if you could wave a wand, what would you have? So these 3 questions always start a conversation. And when we start the conversation about, what we can do better or what we know works or what we know doesn't work, we start nurturing our teams, we start nurturing our people, and we start getting the buy-in of our teams into change, that we know that we want to make. And that then protects us. It protects our teams. It protects our reputation internally amongst our teams. And that then starts to uplift our customer experience, because a happy team, a validated team, a team who feels heard and feels part of that change is going to give you their best in return. So what we really want to do is support our people so that we can understand how to support the tech that needs to do the heavy lifting for us.
Yep. No, look, great points you've raised. And I think having sat in both the sales conversations as well as the implementation of the project side of things, I think a huge part of that fundamental shift is really about ownership. Who owns the handoff? And it's also, I guess, a bit of reflection of, okay, what, if we're being really truthful, as you said, what are the things that we really need to fix to try and make life easier for everyone, right? Or are we just happy to keep spending hours late at night doing things manually, entering data between different systems? And in most construction or trades and services businesses, people don't want to keep doing that, right? We want to spend more time with our family, or have more time to spend with customers because we want to grow the business, or spend more time with helping to train our staff because we might have some apprentices we want to help to grow and blossom in their careers, right? Like, everyone's got their different motivations and different things they want to try and achieve, but it's really around, what's the handoff look like between the different departments within the business, and who's taking ownership of that? Do we recognize there are things that we can improve, or are we living in blissful ignorance and thinking, okay, everything's fine and dandy, and we're just going to continue to live in this happy place without recognizing that there's challenges we face? So I guess in summary, and I guess in closing things off, if this conversation has resonated with you, whether you're running a construction or trades and services business, or whether you're heading up operations or anything that's project based, feel free to head to our website, moti.co/playbook, to have a look at what closing that loop could look like for your business. So from that, I'm just going to say a quick thank you to Kate for joining us on the podcast today. So thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you to everyone for listening as well, and we'll see you on the next episode.
That's it for another episode of the Moti Playbook. One shift, one system, one measurable improvement. All information shared in this podcast is general in nature. For tailored advice specific to your business, visit moti.co/playbook and book a momentum call with our team. See you next time.